mean, LSD, mescaline, all these things, cannabis, of course, they were interesting. But when we had DMT, it totally shattered our worldview.
Right.
You know, and we thought this stuff is, this isn't just the most interesting drug we've ever experienced. It's the most interesting thing in our universe,
right?
Period. And so, how can we ignore it?
Right. That's right.
We've got to investigate this as curious people, and probably with some pretenses to being scientists, but we weren't. Obviously, we had no. But we did have that quality that's important in science, which is curiosity.
Right.
And we thought, well, the frustrating thing about DMT, if you've experienced it, which you probably have, it's so short and it's so overwhelming that you can't come out of it with a lot. You come out of it with a sense of astonishment, something really amazing has happened. But beyond that, you can't make a lot of sense out of it other than that. And so we decided we thought naively enough, but also, correctly enough, that if we could spend more time in that place, we might get a better handle on it. We might get our sea legs if we could spend, an hour there, a couple hours there, see what was going on. So that was what led us to go to South America, because we stumbled on this paper by Schultes, which was R.E. Schultes, the famous ethnobotanist. The title of it was Virola, as an orally active hallucinogen. And Virola is a genus of trees in the nutmeg family that is used as a source of snuffs in various parts of South America. The Yanomamo, particularly, they cook down the bark, and they cook down the sap, actually, which is full of tryptamines, DMT, 5-methoxy DMT. They powder it up and they make a snuff out of it, which they blow through each other's nose through these 3-foot-long pipes, and so that alone is enough to set you back. But what Schultes was writing about was same plants, but prepared as an orally active preparation by the Witoto Indians and related tribes, the Bora and the Muinani. Instead of powdering the material, they cook it down. They concentrate this resin, and they roll it into little balls, and they roll ashes on it. And then they take that, and take a piece maybe the size of your thumb, not very much. And you take it, and supposedly it has an instant effect, and, is very strong. When we actually got to Virola, it took a while to actually access this. In fact, 10 years later, when I went back to South America to do my graduate work, this was one of the focuses of my research, was to these orally active Virola preparations. The other side of it was ayahuasca, and my thesis was a comparison between the chemistry and pharmacology of ayahuasca and the chemistry and pharmacology of ukuhe, as this thing was called. Totally different plant sources, similar chemistry involving tryptamines, oral activity, and so on. And so eventually we did find, well, the problem with the ukuhe is it's a disappearing tradition. When we went to La Chorrera, we went there because that was the ancestral home of the Witoto people.
Gotcha.
We were totally unaware of the fact that William Burroughs had been down that same trail,
right.
Back in the 50s. I mean, total coincidence. We went to La Chorrera because that's where we thought we would get the ukuhe.
Yeah, right.
And and that's. But when we the La Chorrera thing 10 years later, when I was doing my work in Peru, it was in the same area but south of the Putumayo. The Putumayo being the river that separates Colombia and on the north and Peru on the south. So when I went there, when I went to that area, it wasn't the ancestral home. The Witoto had been forcibly relocated south of the Putumayo. So it was a dying culture. It was not very intact. And the first thing to go in such situations is usually the shamanic traditions, knowledge of the plant medicines, and so on. So the people there were saying, well, we sort of remember how our grandfathers did this. We don't really do this anymore, but we'll try to make it for you.
Right.
And they did. They were happy to try. Some of the samples that we got were inactive as far as I could tell, and others did work. And when we got it back to the lab, we had a pretty good correlation. I mean, I was able to do analysis on them, and the ones that had the most activity were, basically high in tryptamine, actually 5-methoxy DMT more than DMT, and the ones that lacked activity didn't have any alkaloids. There's a great deal of variation in these varrolas in the field, and they all look similar.
I want to ask your opinion about shamans. Do you find them necessary? I've heard stories of sexual abuse and people abusing people that are during the ceremony. I mean, how do you feel about those reports? And would you rather a shaman, or would you rather not a shaman be there?
I think it depends on the shaman.
Right.
And there are now that this ayahuasca tourism thing is going.
Right. That's my point.
There are reports of sexual abuse. It does go on, no doubt about it. And it's not about ayahuasca. This sort of stuff goes on with any kind of cult-like situation. You can see the same thing in yoga ashrams, and the same thing where you've got vulnerable people who are looking up to somebody with authority and power, and that's what the dynamic is. So obviously I don't approve of that. I think it's inevitable, but I don't think it's good, and I think it's a measure of kind of the quality of a shaman. That they're not predators. This is not too much to ask.
Right. Of course.
They need to have enough of a moral compass about themselves to realize that this is not appropriate. And but I just don't know how prevalent it is. But it shouldn't go on. I don't think that a shaman is essential to learn about these psychedelics. I think that because the psychedelic is the shaman, or not, the psychedelic is the teacher in a way. You're the shaman. All a good shaman does is create the space, sort of create the good setting and the right atmosphere through whatever they do, the Icaros and the other things they do to create the space. But ultimately, it's between you and the teacher plant, whether that's mushrooms or ayahuasca or whatever. I think that ayahuasca lends itself more to a ritual situation, and I do like it that way.
Right.
But I do not say that you must go with the shaman. Right. I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing about psychedelics, is they're an intensely individual thing.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have faith. You don't have to follow really any rules. I mean, you can look at guidelines and you look at what makes sense. But ultimately, the responsibility is on you. And it's like, okay, here's an experience. Make of it what you will, and some people may say this was a transcendent experience and most fantastic thing that ever happened to me, and other people may say, I felt like I was toxified and poisoned, and both are legitimate, things to take away from it.
I know you experienced photosynthesis on one of your trips. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. yeah, that was a really profound trip.
Right.
And it's one of my most profound early trips on ayahuasca. And it's been, I've told that story, and it's on YouTube a few times reading from the book. But long story short, yeah, I was with the UDV. I'd been down there for a conference. This was 1991. And they were thinking about doing a biomedical study of ayahuasca, of Ayahuasca, as they call it. You know, the UDV is this church, right, in Brazil. União de Vegetal is what it stands for. And they were under pressure from the government to show that ayahuasca, or huasca, which is basically the Portuguese equivalent, was not dangerous, and that they weren't just a bunch of drug abusers, and so part of their strategy was let's conduct a biomedical investigation of it, and let's have foreign investigators come in and do whatever they want, you know, do some analysis of our practice and the people, and do all this evaluation. So, and eventually we did that. But in 1991, that we were in the planning stages, essentially, they invited myself and a number of investigators in different areas, anthropologists, chemists, you know, pharmacologists, doctors, and so on, to this conference outside Sao Paulo, in which all these things were discussed. And, you know, and that's where we came up with the idea to do a biomedical study. But then after the conference, they wanted to be sure that everyone had a good experience, that they got it, you know, on an experiential level. And so they got us together in this temple, which was close to the conference center. It was actually a summer camp where we had the conference. Right next door was their temple. So, 500 people were there on the final night of the conference, came to this thing, 500 people. And along with all the dignitaries, you know, of which I guess I was one. And, and so we took the brew, and, unfortunately, we didn't understand Portuguese, so we were not really expected to pay attention to what was going on. So we were free to go inside and look inside. And what happened to me in this introspective state, you know, we've just been endless raps, round tables, PowerPoints, all kinds of discussions like conferences are. And of course, I'm going into the state and I'm thinking about all this, turning it over in my mind. And I was thinking about how the UDV characterized ayahuasca as a combination of the force and light, right? It's force and light. And the force being the Banisteriopsis vine, the MAO inhibition that drives the thing, and the light being the chacruna, you know. And I thought, the light being the source of the DMT, right? The chacruna, the leaf. And so I was just thinking about, they had talked about that. This is our view of it, you know, and I thought how very apt a description that really was. And, and about the time I was thinking about that this voice came over my left shoulder, and it was basically something like, you know, you want to see force? I'll show you force.
Oh, man.
And it was, you know, thrown down as a challenge, and it was all about, you know, and then it was thrown down, but it wasn't like, no thanks, I think I'll pass this time. It was like, no, you don't have a choice, boy. You know, you're gonna see force. And so the next thing I knew, I was, you know, in this state where I started, I was like transformed, translocated to, you know, above the Amazon basin. And I was at the top of this world tree, which was, you know, a huge Banisteriopsis vine. So, you know, with its roots down in the Amazon, and I was like in orbit or something. I was like, in space, and I was looking down, and I could see. So all those shamanic themes about the world tree and the axis of the world and all that were there, and so I had that view. And then the next thing I knew, I was transformed. I was translocated down into the roots of I was translocated down into the underground, into the, I guess, rhizosphere, you could call it, underneath the rhizosphere of the Banisteriopsis vine, and I was a water molecule. I saw the whole process of photosynthesis from the standpoint of a water molecule, which is one of the chief reactants in photosynthesis, right? It's water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight that puts the magic together. And I was, I was a botanist, so I understood the process fairly well from a biochemical point of view and in the abstract. But suddenly here I am, I'm this water molecule, and I'm in this huge, cistern of water underneath the Amazon basin, and I'm being translocated with billions of other water molecules up through the roots and into the leaf and into the chloroplast, and then going through that whole process. Because one of the things about photosynthesis is, have you ever studied any of this biochemistry? Yeah, you have. So the light, the chlorophyll harvests the light. In order, what it does with that energy is essentially splits water. It ionizes water, and the oxygen is released from that process, and the two hydrogens, the protons, that are left from H2O are used to reduce another reactant in the reaction change, and then that's used to reduce carbon. So that's the basic. That's how carbon is changed from carbon dioxide into an organic compound and brought into the world, into the biosphere. And without going through every step, which I probably couldn't remember anyway. But I was going through this whole process, and I was going through it as from the point of view of a water molecule, which happens to be the entity that is completely destroyed in this process. It's literally shattered by the energy of the sunlight. Right. So this is the force. It is the force. If you think about it, it's an incredible force. Yeah. It's what brings energy in a useful form into the biosphere. By binding sunlight essentially into organic molecules. It is. I think at the time, and I've said in the book, it is. E. Cummins called it, something like the green fuse that drives the flower. So, the hippies talked about flower power, flower power, kind of, this soft idea. But actually, flower power is the most important force in nature, at least in our biosphere, because without it, we wouldn't be able to survive. I mean, plants produce the oxygen that lets things like us survive, as well as all the useful compounds that we use for everything else, including food. So it is an incredible force, and it's also the force that maintains the homeostatic, systems in the biosphere that are trying to keep life sustainable on Earth, and that we're busily working to undermine as quickly as we can. But, so far we haven't won, and we better hope that we don't win. And so that also was, a message that came out of this whole thing. It was more than just a lesson in biochemistry. It was a profoundly moving kind of thing, because as I saw this, then I was just overcome with this feeling of sadness and feeling about, what are they doing to the Amazon? And how can this be going on? And it was all about how we have to stop this if possible. And so it was an emotional thing for me, And then at the end, if you've read the episode, at the end, the voice came back and said, well, you monkeys only think you're running the show, which I say many times, and I truly believe it. And the other thing is, we're not going to let this happen. Right. Basically, we being the rest of the biosphere, and you monkeys are out of control, and you need to get in control. You need to get in control of yourselves, and or we may have to take drastic measures. So we'll see what happens.
Right.
Jeez.
I don't worry about the survival of life on the planet. I think that life can exist in very broad parameters. Right. Humans, not so much.
Right. George Carlin has that quote. It's that the Earth will be fine. It's the people that are fucked.
Yeah. And if the people went away tomorrow, the Earth would be fine, and it would probably begin to heal itself at that point. Because, it really has a tendency toward homeostasis, and it's a self-healing system.
Right.
But if you keep pushing it, there are limits. There are tipping points beyond which you can't fix it. And we're getting close to that.
Right.
If you believe the science, and I do, I tend to think that we're getting close to that. And the problem is that we're, as a species, we're just not waking up.
Yeah.
We're just not waking up.
What do we need to do?
Take more ayahuasca. One thing. No, seriously. We have to take more ayahuasca, introduce other people to it, propagate the plants, spread the plants around. This is maybe the best tool that we have to change hearts and minds, because so many people come away from their ayahuasca experience, especially if they take it in the Amazon, but anywhere really, they come away with this very much this sort of renewed love for the planet and this new ecological perspective, this appreciation of nature and the oneness of nature, and the realization that we're part of nature. We don't rule it, we don't control it, we don't own it, but we are part of it. And we have to, our job is to do as little damage as possible. Our job is to nurture it, but not from the sense that we control it, just to do what is what is nurtured for it. And we're trying to overcome at least 2,000 years of this Judeo-Christian perspective,
right,
which is very much anti-nature.
Right, absolutely.
It's all about God said you own nature, you must subdue nature.
Right,
it's
we're in control.
Right.
We're in control,
but we're not.
And not only that, salvation is not to be found in this world. It's found in the next world. So it leads to this mindset of devaluing nature,
right?
And that's a very dangerous thing. Well, we're seeing the effects of it. We're seeing the effects of this now. So one thing we need to, I never miss an opportunity to criticize these religions, because I think they've led us down a primrose path.
Right. This is one of my questions for you too, about psychedelics and faith, and how, for you, I'm curious of how it broke down the walls of religion for you. That was one of my questions I had.
Well, I don't know if it really broke down the walls. By the time I got to psychedelics, I'd already pretty much rejected religion. Any 12-year-old who actually looks at the situation can tell that this is empty. I think there's a core of truth in these religions, on the moral side and all that. I certainly don't. I think that Jesus was a great teacher, if he ever existed at all.
Right.
But the teachings are solid. It's all the dogma and the hierarchy and the baggage that's been placed on top of this.
Right.
Religion has been working, organized religion, they're terrified of meaningful direct experience. They talk about the direct experience of the transcendent, but no, it's got to go through the priests. You can't have people going off and having these direct experiences. So unfortunately, this is one of the problems. Our religious institutions are just hollowed out shells of what they were meant to be, and they're not religious anymore. They're political institutions.
Absolutely.
They're designed to control people's behavior,
of course,
and importantly, to shut people up.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So I think that psychedelics are, this is one reason why people are reaching out to ayahuasca and other things. They want meaningful experiences, and our society does not provide those, and so they go to South America and in search of something, and a lot of them do find meaningful experiences.